Welcome, dear listener, to a gentle retelling of one of humanity's most timeless sagas, the journey of Odysseus across the wine-dark seas to return home. As you settle into comfort and prepare for rest, allow this ancient tale to guide you through moonlit waters and distant shores where gods mingled with mortals. Each wave, each gust of wind carried with it not only the promise of adventure, but also hidden wisdom, like secrets waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough to embark on their own journey. If you find peace in these quiet historical journeys, your kindness in sharing them helps breathe life into more such stories, like flickering lights leading others toward a restful slumber, where the echo of every tale helps soothe weary souls and nourish the imagination. Now, close your eyes and let your mind drift with me, back over 3,000 years to where our story begins. The sun hung low over the plains of Troy, casting long, haunting shadows across a battlefield scarred by 10 years of relentless war. The mighty walls of Troy, once impenetrable and proud, lay in ruin, shattered like stones scattered on the beach after a violent storm. From the crumbled ruins, smoke rose in slow, mournful spirals, carrying with it the final echoes of conflict and the birth of countless stories that would ripple through time, their voices intertwined with the sands of history. Among the Greek warriors who walked through the fallen city, one man's thoughts had already shifted from the battle to the distant shores of home. His feet dragged in the dust of Troy, yet his mind sailed far across the seas, toward a place of warmth, love, and peace, far from the destruction and bloodshed he had left behind. Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, stood amidst the remnants of Troy's great gates. His hands, calloused and weathered by years of conflict, rested on the pommel of his sword, a weapon forged for victory, but now only a reminder of battles long fought. But his thoughts, his heart, sailed far beyond the smouldering ruins. His mind longed for the rocky shores of his homeland, where olive trees gleamed silver under the Mediterranean sun, where his wife, Penelope, waited faithfully, and where his son, Telemachus, grew older with each passing day, unaware of the hardships his father had endured. It was Odysseus's intellect that had led to Troy's fall, the brilliant strategy of the Trojan horse, a scheme that turned the tide of the war and brought victory when brute strength alone could not. Yet now, as ash fell around him like heavy snowflakes, he felt only weariness. The weight of 10 long years pressed down on him, a burden that went beyond the body, deep into his soul. The longing for home was so profound, it seemed to pull at the very fabric of his being, a deep ache that refused to be soothed. 10 years had passed since he had last set foot in Ithaca, and every part of him yearned for the familiar comforts of home, the sound of his wife's voice, the warmth of the hearth, and the calm of the life he had once known. The harbour of Troy, now a bustle of preparation, marked the departure of the Greek fleet. Ships that had once carried warriors to war now took on the weight of treasure and memories of their hard-won victory. The sea, which had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, now lay calm, as if waiting for the departure of those who had sought to conquer it. Odysseus gathered his loyal crew, men who had followed him through the darkest days of the war, men who shared his hunger to return home. Their ship, sleek and swift, bobbed gently in the harbour like a seabird, eager for the freedom of flight and the promise of the longed-for horizon. As they prepared to set sail, the other Greek leaders bid their farewells. Agamemnon, the High King, embraced Odysseus with the weary relief of a man who had borne too great a burden for far too long. And Menelaus, for whom this war had been fought, clasped his hand with gratitude. The bonds formed in battle were not easily severed, and as the leaders exchanged words of parting, they all understood that this moment marked not just the end of a war, but the beginning of another journey, one filled with uncertainty and hope. But it was old Nestor, wise in years and counsel, who spoke words that would prove far more prophetic than anyone could imagine. "The war's won, Odysseus," the old king said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "But the journey home may prove longer than any of us expect. The gods have their own designs, and mortal plans are but threads in their greater tapestry." Odysseus nodded respectfully, though his heart burned with a single desire, the longing to return to Ithaca. He could almost taste the salt of the sea air, could almost hear the wind whispering through the olive groves. And in his mind, Penelope's voice called out to him, a beacon of hope in the dark sea of uncertainty. He did not yet understand the full weight of Nestor's words, but little did he know that this journey, this homecoming, would not be the simple return he had imagined. It would stretch beyond the borders of time, becoming a tale told around hearthfires for generations, a tale that would live on long after the dust of Troy had settled. The morning sun rose clear and bright as the Greek ships, loaded with warriors and memories, began to set sail from the war-torn shores of Troy. The wind filled their sails, sending them forward across the wine-dark sea, a sea that had borne witness to the rise and fall of civilizations, to the triumphs and tragedies of gods and men alike. Odysseus stood at the helm, watching as the city of Troy faded into the distance, its broken walls barely visible on the horizon. He felt the tug of the sea beneath him, the pull of the water that would carry him home. For the first time in years, the weight on his shoulders seemed to lighten. The promise of home, of peace, of reunion, filled his heart with warmth, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself to dream of the life that awaited him. The crew, too, seemed in high spirits. The constant strain of the war had taken its toll on them. But now, with the horizon stretching out before them, they felt the first stirrings of hope. They sang songs of victory as the ship cut through the waves, their voices rising and falling with the rhythm of the oars. Each man had his own reason for wanting to return home. Some longed for their wives and children, others for the comforts of hearth and home, but all shared a single desire, the longing to escape the shadow of war and return to a place of peace. For several days, they sailed in high spirits. The weather remained fair, and the gods seemed to smile upon their journey. But, as Nestor had warned, the gods had their own designs. What seemed like an ordinary journey would soon be turned on its head by forces beyond mortal understanding. On the 10th day after leaving Troy, the winds began to change. What had been a gentle breeze turned into a wild, howling gale, as if the very sea itself had turned against them. Dark clouds gathered overhead, blocking out the sun and casting the world into shadow. The ship rocked violently as the waves grew higher and higher, their crests white with foam, crashing against the sides of the vessel with a ferocity that threatened to tear them apart. Odysseus, ever the leader, barked orders to his crew. They scrambled to secure everything on board, checking the ropes and making sure nothing would be swept away in the storm's fury. But this was no ordinary storm. The waves rose like mountains, each one more terrifying than the last. The ship crested one wave, only to plunge into the trough of the next, sending a shiver of terror through the men. They could feel the ship being pushed off course, helpless against the power of the storm. For 3 days and nights, the storm raged without mercy. The crew fought to keep the ship on course, their hands raw from gripping the oars, their bodies exhausted from the constant struggle against the waves. Odysseus himself stood at the helm, his hands blistered from the wheel, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, but he refused to leave his post. He had faced storms before, but never one like this. The gods, it seemed, had other plans. When the storm finally broke, the calm that followed felt almost unnatural. The sea, which had been a wild beast, was now eerily still. The crew, battered and weary, looked around, unsure of where they were. The stars that appeared in the sky that night seemed unfamiliar, their patterns strange and unsettling. They had been driven far off course, into waters that did not appear on any map Odysseus had ever seen. In the morning, they found themselves at the shore of an island unlike any they had encountered before. The land was shrouded in a mist so thick it seemed to float above the sea like a dream. The air was heavy with the scent of flowers, and the land beyond the shore appeared to be a paradise. A land untouched by war, untouched by the troubles of the world. Odysseus, cautious as ever, chose to send 3 of his most trusted men ashore to explore. They rowed to the beach in the small boat, their oars barely disturbing the glass-like surface of the water. As they stepped onto the shore, they were greeted by a sight that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. The hills were carpeted with flowers so vibrant they almost glowed, and the air was thick with the scent of lotus blossoms. At first, there seemed to be no danger. The islanders, who greeted the strangers with open arms, offered them food and drink without question. They were the Lotus Eaters, a people whose faces shone with serenity, whose movements were slow and graceful, like dancers in a dream. They shared with the Greeks their food, a fruit that seemed to hold all the sweetness of paradise within it. The Greeks, hungry and exhausted from the storm, ate gratefully, not knowing that they were about to encounter something far more dangerous than any storm. As the Greeks ate the magical fruit, something strange began to happen. The memories of home, the faces of their wives, the sound of their children's voices began to fade, slipping from their minds like morning mist. The urgency of their journey, the hunger for home, seemed less important with each bite. Time itself seemed to slow, stretching out lazily as though nothing mattered anymore. The men, once so eager to return home, now felt no desire to leave. The island of the Lotus Eaters had cast its spell, and the Greeks found themselves lost in a haze of contentment, no longer driven by their need to return to Ithaca. Hours passed, then days, and still the men did not return to the ship. Odysseus, growing concerned, went ashore himself. But when he found his men, they were sitting in a circle with the Lotus Eaters, their eyes distant, their minds far from the journey that had once driven them. They no longer cared about returning home. They had forgotten who they were and what they had come for. Odysseus, with his heart heavy, knew he could not leave his men behind in this strange, enchanted land. The Lotus Eaters, serene and oblivious to the passage of time, offered a peace that seemed too perfect, too tempting for the weary souls of his crew. But peace, Odysseus knew, had a price, one that would cost them more than they could ever imagine. With a determined resolve, Odysseus went to each of his men, shaking them from their stupor. Their eyes, once bright with purpose, now seemed clouded, distant, as if they were no longer fully present in the world. As he called out to them, they turned toward him slowly, like people waking from a deep sleep, their faces blank with confusion. But Odysseus would not relent. He grabbed each of them firmly by the arm, and with a strength born of necessity, forced them back to the boat. The Lotus Eaters watched them with serene smiles, not attempting to stop them, as if they knew that Odysseus's resolve was stronger than any spell they could cast. The Greek crew, still dazed, was dragged back onto the ship, and the anchor was raised without delay. As the ship pulled away from the shore, Odysseus felt a heavy weight lift from his chest. He had saved his men, but the danger they had encountered was not one he could simply forget. As they sailed away from the land of the Lotus Eaters, the three men who had tasted the fruit of the island began to weep. Their memories of home slowly began to return, like the tide creeping up the shore, but they wept not only for the time they had lost, but for the fleeting taste of paradise that had slipped from their grasp. The land of the Lotus Eaters had promised peace, but it was a peace that came at the cost of their very identity. Odysseus watched them with a heavy heart, understanding now that the journey home would be unlike anything he had expected. The dangers of the sea had once been his greatest threat, but now he realized that the greater danger was the lure of complacency, the temptation to surrender to peace and forget the very purpose of his journey. He could feel the weight of that realization settling over him, a reminder that not all battles were fought with swords. Some, like this one, were fought within the heart. Their ship sailed on, the wind now at their backs. But Odysseus's thoughts were not with the smooth waters ahead. Instead, he thought of the challenges still to come, the gods, the monsters, and the temptation to give in to the siren call of peace. The journey was far from over, and the true test of his will had only just begun. As they sailed, the days passed in relative peace, but Odysseus could not shake the feeling that the gods were still watching, still waiting for him to make his next move. His crew, though safe for now, still bore the scars of their previous trials. Each man had been tested. Each had come face to face with the possibility of losing himself, and each would need to find the strength to carry on. In the distance, the next landmass began to take shape on the horizon. Odysseus squinted into the distance, trying to make out its features. It appeared to be a dark and forbidding place, but Odysseus knew that their journey had not yet reached its end. There were still many trials ahead, and the gods would test them again before they could finally return to Ithaca. With his mind racing and his heart heavy, Odysseus ordered his ship toward the mysterious shore. Whatever lay ahead, he knew it would require all of his cunning and strength to face the challenges that awaited him. The journey home was not just a return to Ithaca, it was a journey of transformation, a test of what it meant to be truly human in a world ruled by gods. As the ship sailed onward, the wind still favoring their course, Odysseus found his thoughts drifting to the path that lay ahead. The ocean, vast and unpredictable, stretched out before them like an endless canvas, its waves both a promise and a threat. The crew, though recovering from their encounter with the Lotus Eaters, remained weary and cautious. They knew that the gods had not yet finished testing them. The next landfall came sooner than Odysseus had expected. A jagged coastline rising sharply from the sea. The cliffs were sheer and intimidating, their faces carved with caves that resembled the hollow eyes of ancient stone statues. The ship's crew, sensing the ominous nature of the place, stood in silence, gazing at the land ahead. There was something about the place that filled the air with unease, a tension that seemed to reach from the very rocks themselves. Odysseus, however, was not one to shrink from danger. He gathered his men and, with a sense of determination, led them ashore. The land they had arrived at was the home of the Cyclopes, giant, one-eyed monsters who lived in isolation, far from the reach of human civilization. These beings were known not for their wisdom or their kindness, but for their cruelty and savagery. The Greeks climbed up the rocky path, their feet slipping on the loose stones, until they came upon a cave, its entrance large enough to swallow an entire ship. The cave was dark and forbidding, and from within came the bleating of sheep and goats, sounds that seemed oddly peaceful in contrast to the threat that hung in the air. But Odysseus, driven by his curiosity and his desire to understand the creatures that inhabited this strange land, chose to enter the cave. Inside, the cave was a marvel of its own. The walls were adorned with tools of a shepherd, each one larger than anything Odysseus had ever seen. Stone bowls that could hold an entire man, and wheels of cheese as big as shields lay scattered across the floor. The sheer size of everything in the cave made Odysseus's heart race with both wonder and fear. The Cyclopes, it seemed, were truly a different breed of creatures altogether. His men urged him to take what they could carry and leave immediately, but Odysseus, ever the seeker of knowledge, refused to leave without seeing the Cyclops himself. The thought of encountering a creature so legendary, so feared by others, filled him with a sense of purpose that overpowered his caution. As the sun set, the ground began to tremble under heavy footsteps, and through the cave entrance appeared the most enormous being any of them had ever seen. Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, stood twice the height of a tall man, his broad shoulders like the beams of a ship. But what struck the Greeks most was his face, one massive eye in the center of his forehead, burning with an intelligence that seemed both alien and terrifying. The Cyclops, after driving his flock of sheep into the cave, noticed the strangers. His one eye fixed on them with a predatory gleam, his voice like the grinding of rocks as he spoke. "Little men," he rumbled, "who are you to enter my home uninvited? Are you traders sailing the sea roads, or are you pirates bringing harm wherever you go?" Odysseus stepped forward, his voice calm but firm, and spoke of their journey, of their desire for hospitality, as was the custom of travelers. But as he spoke, he could see the giant's expression change, an eerie flicker of hunger replacing the curiosity in his eye. "No," the Cyclops grunted. "Not friendship, but hunger." His massive hand shot out, grabbing two of Odysseus's men, with terrifying speed. What followed was a horror that none of the Greeks could have imagined. Polyphemus, the one-eyed giant, was not just hostile, he was a cannibal. He tore his victims apart, devouring them in front of the others, the cave echoing with their screams. The remaining men watched, frozen in fear, as their comrades met their grisly fate. When Polyphemus finished his meal, he rolled a massive stone across the cave entrance, blocking the only way out. His heavy breathing filled the cave, and the Greeks were trapped, their lives now at the mercy of this terrible creature. But Odysseus, his mind racing, refused to give up. The night passed in agonizing silence, the men huddled together, trying to come up with a plan. They could not overpower the giant. He was far too strong, too massive. They could not escape, for the stone door blocked the only exit. But as dawn's first light crept through the cracks in the cave, an idea began to form in Odysseus's mind. He turned to his men and explained his plan. They would craft a weapon, a spear made from a giant's staff. The staff was huge, as thick as a ship's mast, and taller than any tree. Working in the darkness, the Greeks cut a section from the staff, sharpening it into a deadly point, then hardening it in the fire until it was as strong as iron. They hid the weapon beneath the sheep dung, waiting for the giant's return. When Polyphemus came back to the cave that evening, Odysseus greeted him with a skin of wine, a gift fit for the gods. Polyphemus, eager to drink, accepted the wine greedily, his massive frame trembling with pleasure as the wine warmed him from within. But the wine was strong, and soon the giant was drunk, his single eye growing dull with intoxication. "Tell me your name," the Cyclops demanded, slurring his words. "I will show you mercy and eat you last. Odysseus, ever the clever one, smiled and replied, "My name is Nobody." The Cyclops laughed, his booming voice shaking the cave. "Then nobody you shall be, the last I devour." With the giant now asleep, Odysseus and his men took their weapon and, together, drove the sharp point into Polyphemus's eye. The Cyclops' scream shook the very mountains, but the deed was done. As the giant thrashed in agony, calling for his fellow Cyclopes, they came to his aid, but they could do nothing. "Nobody is killing me," the giant bellowed. And so, the other Cyclopes left him, believing him to be cursed by the gods. But while the Cyclops was blinded and weakened, he was not powerless. He rolled the stone away from the entrance and sat at the mouth of the cave, feeling for anyone trying to escape. The Greeks, knowing they had little time, came up with a final, clever plan. They hid themselves beneath the sheep, knowing that the giant would never think to check under them. The sheep, eager to leave the cave, passed safely by the blinded Cyclops, and Odysseus's men escaped with only a few close calls. But as they made their way back to the ship, Odysseus's pride got the better of him. He taunted the Cyclops, shouting across the water that it was Odysseus who had blinded him. Polyphemus, hearing the name, cursed Odysseus and called on his father, Poseidon, to seek vengeance. "Father," Polyphemus prayed, "if I am truly your son, let Odysseus never reach home, or if he must, let him arrive late and alone, having lost all his companions." After their narrow escape from the land of the Cyclopes, Odysseus and his men sailed onward, their ship cutting through the water with renewed determination. But the victory over Polyphemus had come at a great cost. The gods, as always, were watching, and Poseidon's wrath would follow them for many years to come. Still, Odysseus could not dwell on what had passed. He had made a dangerous enemy, but he had also saved his men, and that had to be enough. For now. As they sailed farther from the land of the Cyclopes, the waters grew calmer, and the crew's spirits slowly lifted. They began to speak of home once again, their voices tinged with the hope that the worst of their trials were behind them. But Odysseus, ever cautious, couldn't shake the feeling that the journey was far from over. His heart, though lightened by the thought of Ithaca, remained heavy with the weight of the unknown. What other dangers lay ahead? What new trials would the gods send to test them? It wasn't long before their next trial arrived. The ship rounded a rocky promontory and came into sight of an island that seemed as though it had been torn from the pages of a myth. The island was lush, with dense forests that stretched up the mountainsides and streams that sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. The air was heavy with the scent of flowers, and the sound of birdsong filled the air. It was a paradise, a place where even the gods might rest and find peace. But Odysseus knew better than to be lulled by such beauty. There was always more to a place than what met the eye, especially when it came to the gods. This island was the home of Circe, a powerful sorceress who was said to possess knowledge of herbs and magic beyond any mortal's understanding. As the ship approached, Odysseus felt a shiver of unease. He had heard tales of Circe and her powers, and he knew that any encounter with her could turn dangerous quickly. Odysseus made the decision to send a group of his men ashore to scout the island and find out more about their mysterious hostess. He chose a group of 12 men, his bravest and most trusted, to explore the land. The rest of the crew would remain on the ship, ready to set sail at a moment's notice. As the men made their way inland, they passed through groves of strange trees, their leaves glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. The forest was quiet, save for the soft rustling of the wind through the trees. The air felt thick, as though it were charged with magic. The deeper they ventured into the island, the more they felt the presence of something ancient and powerful. After a time, they reached a palace, an imposing structure made of polished stone, surrounded by gardens that seemed to bloom in eternal spring. It was a place of unimaginable beauty, but the men could not shake the sense that it was also a place of danger. The air around the palace was thick with enchantment, and even the animals that roamed the grounds seemed to behave differently from those on the rest of the island. Lions and wolves watched the men as they passed, their eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful intelligence. It was as though the creatures knew something the men did not. Despite the eerie atmosphere, the men pressed on, their curiosity driving them forward. They reached the palace doors and knocked, calling out for hospitality. The doors opened to reveal a woman of extraordinary beauty, Circe, the sorceress. She greeted them with a voice as melodic as the sound of the sea, her smile warm and welcoming, yet there was something unsettling in her gaze. "Welcome, noble travelers," she said, her voice like honey. "You must be weary from your long journey. Come, enter my halls and refresh yourselves with food and drink. The road has been long, and you deserve rest." The men, exhausted and hungry, were eager to accept her invitation. They entered the palace and were led to a grand hall where a feast had been prepared. The tables were laden with fruits and meats, and wine flowed freely from golden vessels. The food was unlike anything the men had ever tasted, rich, sweet, and satisfying in a way that seemed to nourish not just their bodies, but their very souls. But Odysseus, who had sent the men to explore, remained cautious. He had heard whispers of Circe's power, and he knew that not everything that seemed good was truly so. He decided to follow his men at a distance, watching as they enjoyed the feast. As he approached the hall, he noticed something strange. The servants who moved about the palace seemed different. There was an odd quality to them, as if they were not fully human. Their movements were fluid, almost dreamlike, and their eyes lacked the spark of life. It was as though they were in a trance. Odysseus's suspicion grew, and he decided to investigate further. As he stepped into the hall, he saw Circe moving among his men, offering them more wine. Her smile was dazzling, but her eyes held something darker, something Odysseus could not quite place. It was then that he realized what was happening. The wine Circe offered them was no ordinary drink. It was laced with magic. Slowly, one by one, the men began to change. Their faces became distorted, their bodies reshaping into something animalistic. They were turning into swine, their human forms slipping away as they became nothing more than beasts. The sight of his men, once proud and strong, now transformed into mindless swine, filled Odysseus with both fury and despair. The magic of Circe was powerful, and the men's transformation was swift. In the blink of an eye, they had gone from brave warriors to helpless beasts, their minds clouded by the enchantment. Odysseus could feel his heart sinking as he looked upon their monstrous forms. These were his men, his loyal companions, and yet they were now beyond his reach, lost to the whims of a sorceress. But Odysseus was no stranger to danger, and he knew that if anyone could find a way to overcome this curse, it was him. He took a deep breath, his mind racing, and searched the room for any clue that might lead him to the solution. As he scanned the hall, his eyes fell on a figure standing in the doorway. A tall, handsome youth with golden hair and eyes filled with divine knowledge. It was Hermes, the messenger of the gods. "I see you've met Circe," Hermes said with a wry smile. "She is a powerful sorceress, but her magic is no match for the will of a hero. Odysseus looked at the god, a mixture of relief and curiosity flooding him. "What can I do, Hermes?" he asked. "My men are lost, and I cannot bear to see them like this." Hermes stepped closer, his voice low and serious. "You must eat this." He handed Odysseus a small white flower with a black root. "This is moly, a herb that grows only in the gardens of the gods. If you eat it before you confront Circe, her magic will have no power over you. When she strikes you with her wand, draw your sword and threaten her life. She will recognize your immunity and offer to make you her lover. Accept her offer, but make her swear by the gods that she means you no harm." Odysseus took the herb and ate it, feeling its power spread through his body like fire. He thanked Hermes, who gave him a reassuring smile before vanishing into thin air. With newfound confidence, Odysseus entered the hall where Circe was still attending to his men, now fully transformed into pigs. Circe looked up as Odysseus approached, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and amusement. "So, you have come to face me, brave Odysseus," she said, her voice honeyed and seductive. "You have resisted my magic, but you cannot resist me forever." Odysseus stood tall, his heart steady, and he spoke with the authority of a king. "You have transformed my men into swine, Circe. You will reverse this spell, or I will make you pay for your cruelty." Circe's laughter echoed through the hall, but she stopped when she saw the unwavering resolve in Odysseus's eyes. She knew that no mortal man could stand against her magic unless the gods themselves willed it. She lowered her golden wand and spoke with a voice full of grudging respect. "You are indeed a man of great strength and cunning," Circe said. "Very well, Odysseus. I will undo the spell. But know this, your journey is far from over. The gods have decreed that you will face many more trials before you return home." With a wave of her wand, the transformation was undone. Odysseus's men, once pigs, were now restored to their human forms. They stood in awe, looking at each other with disbelief, as though they had been asleep for years. Their memories of the past days were hazy, and they could not understand what had happened, but the relief on their faces was unmistakable. "I have kept my word," Circe said, her voice softer now. "You may stay here and rest for a while. But you must remember, there is always a price for peace. The road ahead will be fraught with danger, and you will need all of your wits and strength to survive." Odysseus, grateful for the return of his men, bowed to Circe in respect. "Thank you, wise one. You have shown mercy when none was expected. But know this, I will not stay forever. My home awaits me, and the gods have set me on a course from which I cannot deviate." With that, Odysseus and his men left Circe's palace. They had been given a brief respite, but the journey ahead was still filled with uncertainty. They would sail on, guided by the stars, driven by the need to return home. But the gods had spoken, and their fate was not yet sealed. As they sailed away from Circe's island, Odysseus looked back one last time. The island, bathed in golden light, faded into the distance, but its lessons would stay with him forever. The gods were not to be trusted, but neither were they to be disregarded. Their power could be both a blessing and a curse, and Odysseus knew that he would need every ounce of his cunning to navigate the challenges still ahead. With the spell of Circe now undone and his men restored to their human forms, Odysseus felt a sense of relief, but it was fleeting. The gods had granted him a temporary respite, but he knew better than to think the journey home would be easy. No sooner had they set sail from the island of Circe than the horizon ahead began to darken with yet more uncertainty. For days they sailed on, the wind at their backs, but Odysseus could not shake the sense that something loomed in the distance. The gods, it seemed, had other plans, and once again, the land they would approach was far from a place of peace. The ship began to take a familiar course, but the air had a strange weight to it, and the waters ahead seemed darker than they had before. The crew could feel it, the inevitable pull of fate, dragging them toward yet another trial. Odysseus knew that their next destination was not one of safety, but a place of prophecy, a place where death itself would reach for them. The island they approached was the home of the famous prophet Tiresias, a blind seer who had been given the gift of sight beyond the mortal realm. Tiresias was said to possess the knowledge of the future and the wisdom to guide heroes through their darkest hours. The journey to Tiresias's domain, however, would not be simple. Odysseus had to enter the land of the dead to seek out the prophet's guidance, a terrifying, forbidden place where the souls of the departed wandered. The idea of entering such a place chilled him to the bone, but he knew that if he was to return home, he had no choice but to face this new horror. The journey to the underworld was fraught with peril, and the very air of death hung over the ship like a heavy cloud. As they neared the shores of this cursed land, Odysseus ordered his crew to anchor the ship in a secluded bay. The island itself was a dark, forbidding place, covered in mist and shadows, as if it were a forgotten corner of the world. The very earth seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, a silence that spoke louder than any voice. Odysseus gathered his bravest men, those who had been with him through every trial, and together they disembarked, stepping onto the eerie, lifeless shore. The journey to the underworld began with an ancient ritual. Odysseus followed the instructions given to him by Circe and set up an altar at the edge of a dark, stagnant pool. He made offerings to the gods, pouring libations of wine and honey and calling out to the spirits of the dead. The ritual was a solemn one, a call to the souls of the departed. And as the offerings were made, the ground seemed to tremble beneath their feet. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the first signs of the dead began to appear. Shadows rising from the earth, flickering in the twilight like whispers of the past. These were the souls of the dead, trapped in the underworld, their faces empty and haunting, their eyes devoid of life. Some were lost, wandering aimlessly, while others seemed to cling to the edges of the world, unable to let go of the mortal realm. It was then that Tiresias appeared, his form ethereal and glowing in the dim light. His eyes, though blind, seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality. His voice, when it came, was deep and resonant, filled with the wisdom of ages. "Odysseus," Tiresias said, his voice carrying across the darkened land, "the path you seek is fraught with danger. The gods have set you on a course that will test every part of you, your strength, your resolve, your very soul. You will face many more trials before you can return to Ithaca. But know this, you must control your desires and the hunger for vengeance that burns within you. Only then can you find your way home." Odysseus listened intently, absorbing every word. Tiresias spoke of the god's designs, warning him of the temptations that lay ahead, the dangers of the sirens, the wrath of Poseidon, and the perilous journey through the Strait of Scylla and Charybdis. The prophet's words were both a warning and a guide, a glimpse into the future that would shape Odysseus's choices. "You must be wise," Tiresias continued, "for the choices you make will determine the fate of your men and your return. Beware of your hunger, Odysseus, both the hunger for home and the hunger for revenge. If you give in to either, you will lose everything." Odysseus thanked the prophet, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. He had always known that the gods would demand sacrifices along the way, but hearing the full scope of his future trials filled him with both dread and determination. He would face whatever challenges lay ahead, but he now understood that the journey home would be as much a journey within himself as it was across the seas. As he and his men prepared to leave the underworld, Odysseus cast one last look at the realm of the dead. The souls of the departed were still there, wandering in the darkness, their faces fading as he turned away. He could feel their eyes on him, watching as he stepped back into the light, back toward the ship, and back toward the future. After receiving Tiresias's ominous yet enlightening prophecy, Odysseus and his men set sail once more, leaving the haunting land of the dead behind them. The sea was no longer the calm and peaceful expanse it had once seemed. Now, every gust of wind carried with it a warning, a reminder that the journey ahead would be far from simple. As they sailed forward, Odysseus's thoughts were consumed with the knowledge he had gained from Tiresias. The wisdom of the prophet weighed heavily on his mind, particularly the warning about their hunger for revenge. The sirens, the monsters of Scylla and Charybdis, and the wrath of Poseidon were not just obstacles to overcome. They were temptations, tests of their will. And Odysseus knew, in his heart, that if he let his desire for vengeance or his own pride cloud his judgment, it could all end in disaster. The crew, still recovering from their ordeal in the underworld, was eager to continue their journey. The men trusted their captain, even as the shadow of uncertainty loomed larger with each passing day. The gods had set them on this path, and though Odysseus had no illusions about the dangers, he knew they had no choice but to press on. Days passed, and the ship sailed ever onward, guided by the stars that Odysseus had studied so many times before. He used the patterns of the night sky to navigate, a skill he had learned over the years, both from necessity and from the endless hours spent under the vast dome of heaven. The sea was his second home, and he knew that the stars, while constant, could also be deceiving. What appeared to be one course could quickly turn into another, if one was not vigilant. It was on the 12th day of their journey after leaving the underworld that the crew first heard the haunting melody, a sound so beautiful, so mesmerizing, it seemed to come from all around them. The sirens had begun their song. At first, the music was distant, a faint whisper on the wind, but as they sailed closer, the sound grew louder. It was the song of the sirens, creatures with voices that could lure even the most steadfast of men to their doom. Their song was a promise of knowledge, of pleasure, of forbidden things that no mortal had ever tasted. It was a song that spoke to the deepest desires of the human soul, a song that could unravel the mind and destroy the spirit. Odysseus, remembering Tiresias's warning, ordered his men to block their ears with beeswax, a trick Circe had taught him. But Odysseus himself, ever the curious and defiant one, had other plans. He instructed his men to tie him tightly to the mast of the ship, warning them that no matter how hard he begged, they must not release him until they were safely past the sirens. As the ship sailed closer to the island where the sirens dwelled, Odysseus could feel the pull of their song in his very bones. It was a melody that called to him, a voice that seemed to reach into his soul, promising everything he had ever wanted. He could almost see the sirens, their pale, beautiful faces, their eyes filled with the knowledge of the universe. The temptation to give in, to let go of the journey and stay forever in their embrace, was overwhelming. But Odysseus remembered the prophecy. He remembered the warning of Tiresias and the price that would come with surrendering to his desires. He fought against the pull of the sirens, but their song was like a drug, making it harder and harder to resist. The ropes that bound him to the mast seemed to tighten with every note, but Odysseus held on, his resolve firm. The ship continued its course, drawn irresistibly toward the rocks where the sirens waited. But Odysseus could see the shoreline now, the dangerous cliffs rising up from the sea. The sirens, sensing that their prey was slipping away, sang with even greater intensity. Their voices blended together in a symphony of temptation. But Odysseus's men, with the wax still plugging their ears, rowed on, their eyes fixed ahead. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the ship passed the Sirens' Island, their song fading into the distance. Odysseus, exhausted and shaken, was released from his bonds. His crew, though wary, had followed his orders without question, and they had made it through yet another trial. But Odysseus could not shake the feeling that the gods were still watching, still testing him. The sirens had been a warning, a reminder that desire and temptation could be just as dangerous as any monster or storm. As they sailed further from the island, Odysseus's heart began to slow, his mind clearing. They had passed through one of the most dangerous tests of their journey, but the gods had already planned the next trial. The Strait of Scylla and Charybdis lay ahead, two of the most feared monsters in all of mythology. And Odysseus knew that the final test was still to come. The true cost of his journey would not be in the battles he fought, but in the choices he would have to make. He would need all his wits and courage to survive what lay ahead. The wind carried the ship onward, and the crew, weary from their encounter with the sirens, settled into a more somber mood. The thrill of survival faded quickly, replaced by the weight of what lay ahead. The sea, vast and unyielding, stretched before them, an uncharted abyss of both promise and peril. Odysseus knew that their journey was far from over. As they sailed further into the unknown, the thought of the next trial, the terrifying monsters of Scylla and Charybdis, loomed like a shadow in his mind. The prophet Tiresias had warned him of these creatures, and now the time had come to face them. As the ship approached the narrow Strait of Messina, the crew could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive. The waters grew rougher, the current stronger, as if the very sea itself was conspiring against them. The two monsters, Scylla, the six-headed beast, and Charybdis, the great whirlpool, were said to dwell here, and the legends surrounding them were enough to strike terror into the hearts of even the bravest men. Odysseus stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the churning waters ahead. He could see the distant cliffs, where the rocks loomed like jagged teeth, ready to tear apart anything that came too close. The air grew colder, and the ship seemed to slow, as though hesitant to enter the deadly passage. The crew, despite their hardened resolve, murmured among themselves, their fears palpable in the tense silence that fell over them. Odysseus, however, remained calm. He had faced death many times before, and though this trial would be unlike any other, he knew that he had to lead his men with certainty. He called to his crew, rallying them with his words, though the fear in their eyes was hard to ignore. "Brace yourselves, men," Odysseus said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of experience. "We're about to face a challenge unlike any we have encountered before. The gods will test us, but we must not falter. Keep your wits about you, follow my commands, and we will survive this." With those words, the crew steeled themselves for what was to come. The ship moved closer to the strait, the roar of the whirlpool in the distance growing louder. Odysseus's heart pounded, but he knew that the only way to survive this was to stay focused and rely on his cunning. As they passed through the narrowest part of the strait, the first sign of the monsters appeared. a terrifying shape rose from the waters, a great, monstrous creature with 12 legs and 6 heads, each one snapping at the air with a hunger that seemed insatiable. This was Scylla, the beast that had devoured sailors for centuries, her heads lashed out like serpents, each one a nightmare come to life. Odysseus could see the horror on his men's faces as Scylla attacked, her heads snapping down one by one to snatch up the unlucky sailors who were caught in her grasp. The ship rocked violently as the beast's jaws tore into the men, and Odysseus could only watch in helpless anguish as his crew was torn apart. But the true terror was not over. Ahead, in the distance, Odysseus could see the massive whirlpool that was Charybdis, a swirling vortex of water that would pull them all into the depths. The ship was caught between the two monsters, Scylla attacking from above, and Charybdis threatening to drag them into the abyss below. Odysseus shouted orders to his crew, urging them to row harder, to steer the ship away from the pull of the whirlpool. But the current was too strong, and the ship was drawn closer and closer to Charybdis's deadly grasp. The waters around them churned and bubbled, as though the very sea was alive with fury. For a moment, it seemed as though all hope was lost. The ship was caught in the whirlpool's powerful pull, and Odysseus's crew scrambled in a desperate attempt to escape. But just as the ship was about to be swallowed by the abyss, the gods intervened. The current suddenly shifted, the water around them calming, and with a final push, the ship was freed from the pull of Charybdis. The crew, shaken and exhausted, watched in stunned silence as the ship sailed away from the strait. The monsters, though still a threat, were now behind them, and they had survived, barely. The cost, however, had been high. Several of Odysseus's men had been lost to Scylla's hunger, and the rest were battered and bruised from the ordeal. But they had made it through, and that was all that mattered. Odysseus stood at the helm, his heart heavy with the loss of his men, but his resolve unwavering. The journey home would not be easy. The gods had tested them once again, but Odysseus knew that each trial brought them one step closer to Ithaca. There was still much to face, but for now, they had survived the worst of it. As the ship sailed onward, Odysseus looked out over the calm sea, the storm having passed. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in many years, he allowed himself to believe that home was within reach. As Odysseus and his remaining crew sailed away from the perilous strait, they could not help but feel a grim sense of relief. The terror of Scylla and Charybdis was behind them, yet the weight of their losses weighed heavily on their hearts. Their journey, once full of hope and anticipation, had become a grim reminder of the cost of war and the wrath of the gods. The ship sailed on, the crew weary but still determined to reach Ithaca. The days stretched out before them, each one blending into the next as they navigated through treacherous waters and faced the ever-present threat of divine wrath. Though the sea was calm for now, Odysseus knew that their trials were far from over. The gods were fickle, and they had already proven that they were not finished testing him. It was not long before the next challenge emerged, a place of strange and terrible beauty, a place where the gods themselves had once walked. This was the island of the sun god, Helios, a place where cattle grazed in fields of lush grass and where the winds were always gentle. The men had heard of this island, and they knew that Helios, though a god of great power, would not take kindly to anyone who harmed his sacred cattle. Odysseus, ever cautious and mindful of the warnings of Tiresias and Circe, ordered his men to sail past the island without stopping. But hunger, as it often does, began to gnaw at the men's resolve. The food stores on the ship had dwindled, and the men were growing weak from the long journey. The temptation of the island, its lush fields, the sweet smell of the grass, and the sight of the cattle grazing peacefully in the sun became too much to resist. Odysseus warned his men to avoid the island at all costs, but the hunger within them grew unbearable. Their stomachs growled, their bodies ached for sustenance, and in the end, the desire for food overpowered their caution. They anchored the ship in a secluded cove and made their way to the island, despite Odysseus's protests. The cattle of Helios, it is said, were not ordinary beasts. They were sacred, creatures imbued with divine power. To harm them would be to anger the gods themselves, and Odysseus knew this better than anyone. But the men, driven by hunger, began to slaughter the cattle, roasting them over open fires and feasting on their flesh. When Odysseus learned of this, he was furious. He had warned them, and yet they had disobeyed him, succumbing to their base desires. He prayed to the gods, begging for forgiveness. But he knew that the damage had already been done. Helios, the sun god, would not let this transgression go unpunished. As they finished their feast and prepared to leave the island, a storm began to brew on the horizon. The winds howled, the sky darkened, and Odysseus knew that their disobedience had brought divine wrath upon them. The storm raged for days, as if the very sea itself was punishing them for their transgression. The ship was tossed about by the waves, and the men struggled to keep control as the winds threatened to tear the sails apart. But the storm was only the beginning. As they sailed onward, a bolt of lightning struck the ship, sending a wave of destruction through the vessel. The crew was thrown into chaos as the ship splintered under the force of the gods' anger. The men screamed in terror, and Odysseus fought to keep the ship afloat, but the storm was relentless. The waves rose higher, each one threatening to swallow them whole, and Odysseus could feel the weight of the gods' fury pressing down upon them. The storm lasted for days, and as the ship was battered and broken, Odysseus realized that their journey was coming to a tragic end. The gods had spoken, and their wrath was too much to bear. One by one, the men were lost to the sea, swept away by the storm's fury. Odysseus himself barely clung to the remnants of the ship, his body battered and bruised, his spirit broken. As the storm finally subsided and the waters calmed, Odysseus found himself alone on a piece of wreckage, surrounded by the bodies of his fallen comrades. The island of the sun god was now far behind them, but the price of their disobedience had been steep. Odysseus, though alive, felt as if a part of him had died with the men he had lost. The gods had punished him for his failure to heed their warnings, and the burden of his mistakes would weigh on him for the rest of his days. The storm had passed, leaving behind nothing but silence and a broken, battered ship. Odysseus, though still alive, was now completely alone, cast adrift in the vast ocean with only the wreckage of his vessel to cling to. The crew, who had shared so many struggles and triumphs with him, were gone, swept away by the wrath of the gods. The weight of his loss crushed him, but the journey was not over. Fate, as always, had more trials in store for him. For days, Odysseus drifted across the sea, his body weak from hunger and exhaustion, his mind haunted by the faces of the men he had lost. He had led them into battle, shared their victories and defeats, and now, through his own actions, they were gone. The gods had made their judgment, and Odysseus had paid the price. He could feel the isolation pressing in on him, the loneliness of being the last man standing. He wondered if this was his punishment, for his pride, for his hubris, for defying the gods when he should have obeyed. But even in his darkest moments, Odysseus never lost the will to survive. He had faced death countless times before, and he knew that if he was to see Ithaca again, he would have to keep fighting. The sea, though unforgiving, was not his master. He would survive. He had to. For Penelope, for Telemachus, for the life he had left behind, and the one he hoped to return to. As the days stretched on, Odysseus's fate took another turn. One morning, the sun rose over a strange shore, a land he had never seen before, a place untouched by the trials of war or the cruelty of the gods. The island was beautiful, its shores lined with golden sand and its hills crowned with lush forests. Birds sang in the trees, and the air smelled of sweet fruit and blooming flowers. It was a paradise, a place where Odysseus could rest, where he could heal the wounds of both body and soul. But paradise, Odysseus knew, was often a fleeting illusion. The island was inhabited by the Phaeacians, a noble and hospitable people. Their king, Alcinous, ruled over the land with wisdom and grace, and his queen, Arete, was renowned for her beauty and kindness. When Odysseus stumbled ashore, exhausted and near death, it was the Phaeacians who took him in, offering him food, shelter, and the care he so desperately needed. Odysseus, though wary, did not hesitate to accept their hospitality. He had learned long ago that trust was a luxury he could not always afford, but the kindness of these strangers seemed genuine. They fed him, bathed him, and gave him rest. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Odysseus felt something like peace settle in his heart. The Phaeacians were unlike any people he had met on his journey, gracious, welcoming, and without ulterior motive. It seemed that the gods had sent him here, as though the very land was meant to be a sanctuary for him after his long, tumultuous voyage. In time, Odysseus told the Phaeacians his story. He recounted the trials and tribulations he had faced, from the fall of Troy to his battles with the gods, monsters, and temptation. The Phaeacians listened intently, their eyes wide with wonder at the tales of adventure, danger, and cunning. Odysseus's words were like a balm to his weary soul, for in sharing his story, he could finally give voice to the pain and loss he had carried with him for so long. When Odysseus finished his tale, King Alcinous, moved by the hero's perseverance, promised to help him return home. The Phaeacians, it seemed, were the final hope Odysseus had left. Their ships were swift, and their sailors were skilled navigators. Odysseus knew that if anyone could get him back to Ithaca, it was them. True to their word, the Phaeacians prepared a ship for Odysseus, one that would carry him across the sea to the shores of his homeland. The journey would be a quick one, unlike the long, painful trek he had endured for so many years. The Phaeacians, however, had one condition. Odysseus was to leave without revealing their secret to anyone. The magic of their ships, they explained, was known only to their people, and they did not wish to attract the attention of the gods or the outside world. With his heart full of gratitude and hope, Odysseus boarded the Phaeacian ship, knowing that the end of his journey was finally in sight. The ship set sail under a sky full of stars, the wind in its sails as if the gods themselves were propelling it forward. For the first time in years, Odysseus allowed himself to believe that the journey was truly coming to an end, that Ithaca, his home, was finally within reach. After the Phaeacians had fulfilled their promise and helped Odysseus return to the shores of Ithaca, the journey he had longed for was nearly complete. The gods, despite their trials and tests, had allowed him to return home, but the true challenge was yet to come. As the Phaeacian ship sailed away into the distance, leaving Odysseus standing alone on the familiar shores of his homeland, he felt a mixture of relief and dread. His long journey had taken its toll. But Ithaca, the island that had once seemed like a distant dream, was now a reality. Yet, as Odysseus stepped onto the land that he had fought so hard to return to, something felt different. Ithaca, for all its beauty, seemed unfamiliar, almost foreign. The very earth beneath his feet seemed to whisper of the time he had lost, of the years spent wandering in the unknown, his kingdom, his people. How much had changed in his absence? The gods had not made it easy for Odysseus to return home. Though he stood on the soil of Ithaca, he was not yet truly home. He had to reclaim it, not just physically, but emotionally and politically. The island was under threat from the suitors, men who had taken advantage of his absence and vied for the hand of his wife, Penelope. They had consumed his wealth, and their presence threatened the very foundation of his home. Odysseus could feel his stomach churn with anger, for he knew that these men were not just disrespecting him. They were dishonoring the memory of his leadership, the kingdom he had built, and the promise he had made to return. Odysseus, however, was not a man to face challenges with fear. His mind, sharpened by years of trials and tribulations, quickly turned to strategy. He knew that his return would not be simple, and he could not reveal himself to the suitors just yet. He had to observe, to plan, and to reclaim his kingdom with the quiet precision of the hunter he once was. As he disguised himself as a beggar, an old man ragged and broken by time, he made his way to his palace. The familiar sights of Ithaca, the olive groves, the rocky hills, all seemed to be waiting for him, as though the land itself recognized the king who had been lost and was now returning. His heart swelled with emotion as he saw the home he had left behind, the place he had dreamed of during every sleepless night on the vast, treacherous sea. It was a bitter reunion, for while he had come home, his heart longed for the peace that had once been his, the peace that seemed so distant after everything he'd endured. As Odysseus entered the palace, the scene that met him was one of decadence and disorder. The suitors were loud and boisterous, indulging in wine and feasting, oblivious to the man they were disrespecting. Penelope, his wife, sat in her chamber, weaving and unweaving a tapestry, waiting for a sign from the gods that her husband had indeed returned. But the suitors who had taken over his home did not understand the strength of Odysseus's will, nor the depth of his cunning. They saw only a beggar, and they mocked him, treating him as nothing more than a nuisance to be dismissed. Odysseus, though, had lived a lifetime of hardship and challenges. He had learned not to act impulsively, but to wait for the right moment. His patience was one of his greatest weapons, and he used it wisely. He observed the suitors, learning their weaknesses, noting their arrogance and lack of respect for the gods. He could see that they were nothing like the men who had once followed him into battle. These were weak, self-serving men who had no honor, and it was this dishonor that would be their downfall. Odysseus had seen enough. The time had come to act. He revealed his true identity to his son, Telemachus, and together, father and son devised a plan to rid the palace of the suitors and restore order to Ithaca. With the help of a few loyal servants, they locked the doors to the hall and set about reclaiming their kingdom. What followed was nothing short of a bloodbath. Odysseus, his bow drawn, faced the suitors one by one, picking them off with the precision of a man who had spent years fighting battles of both mind and body. The suitors, who had once laughed at the beggar who stood before them, now faced the wrath of a king who had returned to reclaim his throne. The sound of the bowstring, the thud of arrows sinking into flesh, and the cries of the suitors filled the hall. But Odysseus showed no mercy. He fought with a coldness that reflected all the years of pain, longing, and loss he had endured. In the end, Odysseus emerged victorious, but it was a hollow victory. The palace, once filled with life and warmth, now stood silent and still, a place of sorrow and destruction. The gods had shown him mercy, but they had also demanded a price. Odysseus had returned to Ithaca, but in doing so, he had lost a part of himself. The man who had sailed the seas and faced the gods had finally come home, but he had become someone else in the process. He had seen too much, suffered too much, and in the end, he knew that he would never be the same. The reunion with Penelope was bittersweet. Though she was overjoyed to see him, she too had changed. The years of waiting, of weaving and unweaving her tapestry, had made her stronger, more resilient, but also more distant. Their reunion was not the simple joy Odysseus had imagined, for the years had taken their toll on both of them. But even in their sorrow, there was a quiet understanding. They had both endured, and they had both survived. Together, they would rebuild. But it would never be the same. With the suitors gone and Ithaca once again under his rule, Odysseus stood on the threshold of his home, gazing out at the kingdom he had fought so hard to reclaim. The island was still as beautiful as ever, but it felt different now. The once familiar landscapes, his olive groves, the hills that rose gently from the sea, seemed distant, as if they no longer belonged to him. He had returned, yes, but the cost of his absence had left a mark on the land itself. As he walked through the halls of his palace, Odysseus could feel the weight of the years that had passed pressing down on him. The walls that had once been filled with laughter, love, and life now seemed cold and empty. His servants, his people, had long since moved on, and those who had waited for his return had gone on with their own lives. Even his loyal dog, Argos, who had once been a symbol of his kingdom's vitality, lay dying in the courtyard, waiting for his master to return. The reunion, though deeply emotional, was bittersweet. The world that Odysseus had left behind had changed, and he had changed with it. Odysseus's reunion with Penelope was a moment of great emotional intensity, but it was not the immediate blissful reunion he had imagined. The years of separation had hardened both of them in ways they hadn't fully realized. Penelope, though overjoyed, had endured a long period of uncertainty and grief. The suitors who had filled the palace in his absence were not merely a physical threat. They represented a loss of hope, a loss of her belief in his return. She had kept faith in him, yes, but her heart had also been burdened with the weight of the years that passed in silence. She had been forced to weave her own destiny while waiting for a man who, in many ways, had become a myth in her mind. The tension between them, though full of love, was thick with unspoken words. Penelope's test of Odysseus, asking him to describe their bed, a bed that could only be made by one man, the man who had built it around an olive tree, was a test of more than just his identity. It was a test of their shared history, of the bond that had once been so strong and now seemed fragile. Odysseus, in turn, recognized this as a test of his own, a final challenge to prove not just his identity, but the enduring strength of their marriage. When he passed the test, the last of the barriers between them fell away, and their love, tempered by time, returned as strong as ever. As Odysseus and Penelope reunited, they began to heal the wounds left by his long absence. Yet, the reality of life after such a long and painful journey was complicated. Ithaca was not the same as it had been, and neither were they. The challenges of rebuilding his kingdom were immense, and Odysseus knew that peace would not come easily. He had fought against gods and monsters, but the greatest battle would be rebuilding the world he had lost. The people of Ithaca, though loyal, were wary. They had seen their king disappear for so many years, and they had learned to survive without him. The power struggles that had emerged in his absence would not be easily undone. Odysseus, wise from his trials, knew that restoring his rule would take more than just defeating the suitors. It would take a reintegration of the past with the present, a careful balancing of the old with the new. His first steps were to restore order to his household. Penelope, now secure in the knowledge of his return, began to take back her role as queen, leading with a strength born of years of waiting. Telemachus, Odysseus's son, now a young man, stood beside his father, ready to learn the ways of leadership. The father and son began to work together, but Odysseus was not naive enough to think that peace would come quickly. He had seen the destructive power of time and distance on both his home and his heart. The island began to heal, but healing was a slow and painful process. Every time Odysseus looked out over his land, he was reminded of the years lost and the friends and family who had passed. He could never go back to the way things were. The weight of time had changed him, and in many ways, it had changed Ithaca as well. But there was a quiet resilience in the air, a sense that the land was still strong, still worthy of love and respect. Odysseus had come home, and while the journey had taken more from him than he could ever fully express, it had also brought him something more powerful, a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of the value of home. The final test, however, would not be in the rebuilding of his kingdom or the reclamation of his throne. It would be in the quiet moments spent with Penelope, in the calm of their evenings together, and in the shared understanding between father and son. The greatest victory was not in defeating enemies or overcoming trials, but in the restoration of the heart, his heart, and the heart of his family. And as the sun set on the peaceful shores of Ithaca, with the waves lapping gently against the shore, Odysseus finally found the rest he had long been searching for. The long journey, filled with monsters, gods, and storms, had come to an end. The wind whispered through the olive trees, and the stars above twinkled softly, as if offering their approval for the man who had fought so hard to return to the ones he loved. In the calm of the night, with Penelope by his side and Telemachus at his feet, Odysseus could finally close his eyes, knowing that the journey had brought him more than just a return home. It had brought him peace. And so, dear listener, as you drift off into your own dreams, let this tale of perseverance and love guide you into a peaceful slumber. Like Odysseus, we all face our trials, but home is always within reach, waiting for us to return, no matter how far we wander. Rest now, knowing that the heart's true journey is always one of returning to love, to family, and to the peace we find within ourselves. Good night, and may your dreams be as serene as the shores of Ithaca, where the sea is calm and the stars shine brightly above.